For those of you that don't know me, my name is Maria Copa. I'm a recruiter with a company called Hajoca Corporation. We are the largest privately held wholesale distributor of plumbing, heating, industrial supplies with over 400 locations across the US, including several in Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, which is what we consider our Chesapeake region. It's the area that I most often recruit Virginia Tech students to work in as management trainees and future leaders of our locations, which we refer to as profit centers. Today, we'll be talking about phone interviewing, particularly in light of all the business adjustments due to our current situation. Phone interviewing will become more popular and prominent, and it is definitely a different form of interviewing than in-person interviewing and even video interviewing. There's different tools, tips, and techniques for all those different types of interviews. So I think that phone interviews deserve the time, attention, and preparation as they're often the first step in the interviewing process. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. If you have questions throughout, please jump right in. Okay. Bear with me a moment. Okay. So why are phone interviews important? First of all, how many of us have had job interviews here? Most likely everyone on the call, right? How many of those have been over the phone? If you've ever had a phone interview, you know it's quite different than the traditional in-person interview, though it is arguably just as important. Due to COVID-19, as I mentioned, there will be a huge increase in phone and virtual interviews, and we need to prepare. The first step of which would be participation in a workshop like this one. So if you're here today, good job. That is the very first step. So we'll be covering my tips for how to nail a phone interview, which would be, of course, a practice, do your research, set the tone, listen carefully, answer thoughtfully, ask questions, and follow up. Those first three mentioned, that is all part of the preparation process. That is done in advance of the phone interview, whereas listening, answering thoughtfully, asking questions, following up, that all occurs when you're in the phone interview and afterwards. So let's start with the preparation. First, you'll of course want to practice interviewing whenever possible. It's something that's often offered by career services. I know that at Virginia Tech, and specifically in Pamplin, they offer mock interviews occasionally. And in addition to that, there may be online or community resources available to you. I know here in Philadelphia, we have something called CareerLink, just to name one off the top of my head, that often offers resume reviews, mock interviews, and career readiness workshops. So you might want to look into other resources aside from career services just to get some extra practice in. And lastly, you can always practice aloud by yourself, with a roommate, a friend, a family member, if you're comfortable. And we'll talk more about practicing in our next session focused on the STAR method, which will be at the same time on Thursday. We'll cover more of exactly what to do when practicing alone and aloud, what to look for, and just some general tips for how to improve your technique when you don't have access to mock interview resources. So first step of preparation would be, of course, to practice as often as possible. Second, of course, would be to do your research. This is extremely important. When it comes to research, you want to keep in mind this is not an informal conversation. You want to do as much research as you would be doing for an in-person interview, especially because your preparedness will determine whether you do move on to the next step. So start that now. Don't hold off until you're invited in for the second part of an in-person interview, or you might not even have the opportunity to interview in person. In terms of where to do your research, I recommend one, the company website, first and foremost. Go to the source, look at all their information, including their history, size, the types of positions they recruit for their culture, core values. Refer to the company website for general information. But in addition to that, I would also encourage candidates to reference Glassdoor and LinkedIn for some alternative perspectives. Glassdoor will, of course, offer you input from former and current teammates, keeping in mind, of course, that Glassdoor is often where unhappy teammates go to kind of voice their concerns. So take all the information on there with a little grain of salt, but I know on Glassdoor there is often a lot of pictures, information about the interviewing process, information about benefits. So it offers a lot of value beyond just the reviews themselves. And then, of course, LinkedIn is kind of like a current live feed when it comes to company activity and general information. LinkedIn is often where you see companies share articles about what they're currently doing, pictures or updates from maybe team meetings or conferences they hosted or recruiting events at universities that they attended. So I would encourage you to check LinkedIn as well. Also because you can often find the person that you'll be interviewing with on LinkedIn, and it helps to kind of put a face to the name, particularly when you're interviewing over the phone and won't have the opportunity to even see the person's face, right? So I would encourage you to utilize all of those resources just to get a well-rounded perspective on the company before you speak to the interviewer. Now, phone interviews in particular offer a unique advantage. You'll want to keep in mind that you can have all of this research in front of you. So while you're researching, I would encourage you to gather information that will help you answer the following during your interview. Why do you want to work here? And why do you want this specific job? These are two questions that are often asked in the beginning of your phone call, some variation of these questions, right? So you want to be sure to have the information enough to articulate specifically why you'd want this opportunity with this organization, and your research will absolutely help with this. For example, if you were to be asked why you'd want to work for this particular organization, you might be able to pull information about the company's core values or culture that align with your own core values and culture, or maybe its size and stability. That's something I often hear about with candidates interviewing for positions with Hajoca. And why do you want this specific job? Again, that will be rooted in what you know of the job so far, which you will, learn about through your research, not just the job description, but some of the information you find online as well. So jot those things down because it'll help you to have that information readily in front of you, and it'll make you a stronger candidate for the position by being able to specifically articulate why you want this opportunity. Okay, so keep those two questions in mind as you're doing your preparation. And as mentioned, phone interviews absolutely offer a unique advantage, which is cheat sheets, right? Those notes I mentioned. You can include your company research, job description for the position you're interviewing for, general additional notes like those two questions we just covered, maybe fun facts you found about the organization, questions for the employer. Now, you can have all this in front of you in addition to, of course, your resume, but you want to be sure to practice and prepare enough that you don't necessarily have to rely on these notes. You don't want to be scripted or scrambling throughout the phone call, reading right off of a piece of paper when asked a specific question, but it certainly helps nerves and serves as a little bit of a safety net to have all that information in front of you for you to quickly reference if you're in a moment where you kind of draw a blank, right? So take advantage of this. Though you don't get to see someone in person and have that personal interaction, that is so valuable with in-person interviews, phone interviews absolutely offer some unique advantages. So you want to capitalize on that as much as possible. Questions about research? Towards the end of our call today, I'll be offering an additional follow-up resource, which is a phone interview checklist of sorts, which will include kind of an outline of the information that you should jot down and the things that you should have with you when you sit down for your interview. So you can kind of make sure that you have your pen, your paper for taking notes, your resume, the things listed here, and then it offers kind of a worksheet for you to fill out the company information just to make sure to cover all of your bases, in addition to some suggestions for questions you might want to ask as well. So if you want more detail or an additional resource, I would definitely keep an eye out for that towards the end of the session today.
I had a quick question.
Absolutely, go right ahead.
So my question was that, like, I know you mentioned how it's difficult to kind of create that personal touch since it's over the phone and not in person. So do you have any like tips on like ways to kind of make yourself stand out a little bit more on the phone?
I think primarily you'll want to be well prepared. That's the number one thing that I noticed. Again, in that opening, if I connect with a candidate and they can't quite pinpoint why they want this job, that's a deal breaker. Where on the other hand, if someone is prepared and can speak to company values, maybe they watched a specific video on our website and they talk about that, that does stand out to me. A lot of Virginia Tech students do that, so you must be well prepared by the career services staff. It may not sound like a lot, but if you can do that in all of your interviews, you will stick out. If I can tell that you put in the time prior to our call, that definitely says something to me about your professionalism and your genuine interest in the opportunity.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I would. Beyond that, you don't want to get too wrapped up in standing out so much. Definitely, be yourself to the best of your ability over the phone. I think letting your personality shine through in some way, just by, being talkative and talking about yourself, that will come through when you talk about why you want to work for this company as well. I think that helps. But there's no special, I don't think there's any like tricks or tips to really wow someone in a phone interview. I think a genuine connection is really what's most powerful.
Gotcha. Yeah,
Great
and then
question.
overall preparedness, as you mentioned as well.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, and honestly, your preparedness, if you do that work ahead of the call and you have a foundation to go off of, then it does give you the breathing room. Like I said, it minimizes your nerves, it boosts your self-confidence, and it takes your time and concentration away from trying to memorize all this information about the company, and it allows you to be more true to yourself and more conversational. I think that will help you in terms of making a connection and developing a rapport with the interviewer. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Thanks.
Awesome. Great question. In addition to your research and your practice, you'll also want to set the tone in advance of your interview. So you'll want to make sure to limit distractions and ensure you have good service, phone service. It's really important, and that you're in a quiet space if at all possible. I understand, especially if you're back on campus, you might be in a dorm room or you might have roommates, and that can be challenging. So make sure to communicate to the folks that you live with in advance that you have an interview, and it's important that you have minimal distractions during that time, and hopefully, they respect your time and space. Otherwise, I would encourage you to find maybe a breakout room in the library somewhere, or a space where you really can focus and there's not a whole lot of background noise. So put yourself in the right environment, essentially. In addition to that, if you can stand up during the call and smile while you talk, it will really help your tone And as you know, tone is everything when we don't have nonverbal communication and cues that you would normally have in an in-person interview. So it sounds funny, but you actually sound more confident and articulate when you stand up. I don't ask me about the psychology behind it, but it's true, it works. And then when you smile while you talk, it does make you sound more pleasant, positive, and again, confident. So if you can kind of adopt some of those habits, it will overall help the tone and inflection of your voice during the call. And lastly, I would encourage you to consider dressing professionally, as odd as that sounds. You want to go into this with the mindset that this is an important and real interview, right? Just because it's taking place over the phone, just because you're taking the call in your dorm room, doesn't mean that it's not super, super important and should be treated very professionally. So dressing professionally will help your mindset. Doesn't necessarily help your tone. It doesn't necessarily help your interview answers, but I think it really helps to approach this interview as if it was an in-person, super professional interview. It just kind of puts you in the right headspace when you take the call. And then, of course, as mentioned, have your resume in front of you just as you would in an in-person interview as well. So those are just some general tips for setting the tone, putting yourself in the right mindset, environment, and tips for helping your overall communication. Questions about this? Okay, so that's it for preparation in advance. I know it sounds like a lot, but these are just, for the most part, quick steps aside from the company research, which you'll want to take your time with. So these are just small tweaks and changes that will overall help your interviewing experience. Now, during the phone interview, you want to be sure to listen carefully and answer thoughtfully. These are absolutely skills that you develop with practice. So again, going back to our preparation and practicing as much as possible, they will again help your overall communication and the value of your conversation over the phone. During a phone interview, you are limited to verbal communication, so it's important that your conversation is of value. So those exchanges are clear and that you are listening and answering thoroughly throughout your phone call. So you'll want to, one, listen to the full question before formulating your answer. If you're a people person like me, if you're an extrovert, there's often the tendency to be a little overeager and get excited because you think of a great story you want to tell or an answer you want to provide to a question, and you sort of jump the gun a little bit. If you know you have that tendency, practice as much as possible with just taking a deep breath, pausing, and fully absorbing the question before you answer it. You wouldn't want to miss the mark in your response, and really taking the time to listen to it fully, kind of digest before providing your answer will help you add value in your response, right? In addition to that, don't hesitate to ask the interviewer to repeat a part of the question or the whole question if needed. Again, in a phone interview, the communication sometimes is lost, right? Or maybe it's spotty service, or they talk a little fast like I do. You might need to ask them to repeat something that they said. I know when I started phone interviewing, I was a little bit hesitant to do this. If you miss part of a question or a whole question and you ask for them to repeat it, it shows a level of professionalism and the desire to hear them clearly, listen to them clearly, and provide the information that they're looking for. So I think it shows a level of professionalism. So I'd absolutely encourage you to do that to ensure that you hit the mark, right? And also clarify when necessary. Maybe you fully heard their question and you just don't understand it. This happens as well. So if needed, you can ask the interviewer to clarify or even rephrase the question for you. Again, I think this shows a level of professionalism, and it shows that you're taking this interview seriously and you want to fully understand what they're looking for, right? And then finally, if at all possible, adopt the phrase, did that answer your question fully after providing your response? Again, this is just a clarifying question. It shows you care and it ensures that you did in fact give them the information that they're looking for. I think there's often a lot of concern around, I don't know if that answer was right or I don't know what they got out of that, right? Especially in an interview. If you can follow your answer, particularly for more robust behavioral interviewing questions with, did that answer your question fully? It speaks volumes to me as an interviewer, and it also creates the opportunity for me to bring to light any parts of their answer that were confusing, maybe I need additional information on, maybe they didn't round out their answer and I'm looking for kind of the result or outcome of whatever they shared with me. So that just, again, helps the quality of your exchange. Questions about listening, answering, and any of these tips listed here? Okay. Finally, you want to be sure to ask questions. Remember that interviewing goes both ways. This is the opportunity for you to learn more about this opportunity before you invest more time in the process. And the best person to learn it from would be someone who's currently working there and interviewing a lot of candidates for this position. They know it well, right? So in our preparation, that was one of the things I encouraged you to kind of jot down on your interview sheet. And I have a couple suggestions here for what you might want to ask. What is your favorite part about working for this company? That's important to know. If they struggle with answering this question, I would run. So definitely ask that. See if it kind of resonates with you or aligns with what you want in an organization. What does success look like in this position and how do you measure it? You want to know what you're getting yourself into, right? What are their expectations, and do they have a standard way of evaluating your performance? So that's important as well. What qualities do you look for in a potential candidate? This is important. This will help you kind of gauge whether you are a fit for this position from a personal perspective, right? They might say, oh, somebody who's really personable and loves customer service and eventually wants to go into sales and very entrepreneurial, just to rattle off a few, right? And you might be thinking, I am not a salesperson at all. And that'll help you determine whether this really is going to be a fit for your skills and abilities and whether you're going to feel fulfilled in the role long term. So that's an important question to ask as well. Again, if they struggle to answer that question, I would be concerned if I were you, because the interviewer should have a clear idea of specifically what they need from a candidate to be successful in this position. What are the most challenging aspects of this position? Again, another question to ask just to get a better sense of what you're getting into. And what are the next steps? Again, for your own sake, I would ask a question like this so you can get a feel for what's to come in the interviewing process, and it also reinforces your interest. If a candidate doesn't ask me what the next steps are in the process, I leave our conversation wondering if they want to move forward. So definitely ask that question for your own sake, but also to kind of reinforce that you are looking forward to what comes next. I have additional suggestions for questions for the interviewer, again, on that kind of phone interview checklist, prep list that I can provide you. Any questions about questions to ask the employer? Make sure to write these down. Would be my biggest piece of advice. After speaking to somebody for 45, 30, even 20 minutes, you might find that you're a little spent, right? And you might have had questions that you thought of in advance, but you draw a blank towards the end of the call. So definitely write them down. And then finally, you want to be sure to follow up and send a thank you email. Thank you emails are very important, even at the phone interviewing stage. I think it's a common misconception that they can wait until an in-person interview. Personally, the folks that send me thank you emails really stand out. You asked a question about standing out in an interview. The steps you take following it also helps that too. Thank you emails don't need to be very long. They don't have to take you very much time. They certainly don't need to be sent via snail mail. I can count on one hand the amount of, physical letters, thank you notes that I've received over the last 5 years of my career. An email is quick and it is still personal, high touch, and it definitely helps the candidate stand out. One, you want to be sure to thank the interviewer for their time. They invested the time in preparing for this interview just as you did, and the time in speaking with you. If you can, I would encourage you to personalize it to any extent by mentioning specific parts of the conversation that resonated with you. A lot of this will come from the questions that you asked at the end. For example, what do you enjoy about working for this company? Say I was to say, oh, the culture and the people. I go to work every day and I have fun and I laugh and we're very supportive of each other. And our leaders make sure to, invest in our training and development to ensure that we're growing and living into our potential. I just gave a lot of information, but I'm sure one or two of those things mentioned will resonate with you. If you can mention that and weave it into your thank you note, it will, from the interviewer's perspective, it'll reinforce your interest in the position, your listening skills in our conversation, and your overall fit for the organization. If I see something stood out to you that's important to us and to myself personally, it certainly stands out. Be positive and, like I mentioned, reinforce your interest in the organization, overall enthusiasm about the opportunity. That helps. It can be as simple as, this certainly seems like an opportunity that'll be a good fit for me in my career. This is an organization that I see long-term potential with. One or two sentences. But positivity is certainly important. And express your excitement around the next step. So again, take that opportunity to yet again say, I am looking forward to hearing from you next, right? Hold the interviewer accountable. They do need to follow up with you. They need to get back to you in a timely manner. And you need to know, what to expect moving forward. Our team at Hajoca, we take a lot of pride in kind of our thoroughness and how prompt we are in our responses and our follow-up after interviewers. But sometimes that's not always the case. Recruiting teams may run lean and they're handling a lot of jobs that they're recruiting for. So every opportunity you have to touch on the next steps, ask about the next steps, follow up with the interviewer, I would encourage you to do so, again, to propel you forward in the process. Questions about follow-up and thank you email? Again, it doesn't have to be very long. It could be as long as this little chunk of text here on the screen. Honestly, a couple sentences, and that'll suffice. Questions in general? So if you want more information, if you have specific questions for me, maybe you're interviewing for a job or preparing for a phone interview in the coming weeks, and you're not quite sure how to prepare or approach this particular interview or position, feel free to reach out to me directly. I love giving advice. I recognize particularly phone interviews can be oddly nerve-wracking and a little bit different in our approach. So if you have specific questions, please do not hesitate to reach out. And then finally, if you want that checklist that I mentioned, I'm going to send a link to the chat on the left-hand side of the screen now. If you follow that link and you just enter your name and your email, you'll get a follow-up from me, including some additional resources and my contact information as well if you ever wish to follow up or add me on LinkedIn. Okay? Thank you everyone for your participation today.